We are live in just a few seconds here, just waiting to see who all's going to hop on. Give us just a minute. Feel free to put comments in the chat. Any questions that you have, let us know. We'll be sharing a couple different things tonight and chatting through our licensing of who am I contracting with. I have had some very interesting conversations lately. Here, just wait to see who all's on. Feel free. Okay. Now I can mute that backside. Can you guys hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I forgot now that I have YouTube on my same screen. I have to mute my YouTube so I don't hear myself double talking in a delay. Okay. Oops. We've got Troy. Welcome, Troy.
Welcome.
Thank you. You can hear me?
Yep, we sure can. We'll give it just a minute to let anybody else hop on the YouTube side. YouTube has a little bit of delay behind this recording, so I have the YouTube on in the background just in case somebody's chatting, but we can chat within this messaging ourselves, so we're good on here.
Got it.
All right. We will go ahead and get started. Anything we talk about today obviously is recorded, and I will put any information I share inside of the summary of the YouTube channel. I came across some fun little things today that I haven't even had a chance to share with Karen. So we'll have some interesting conversations about this topic. So one of the reasons, welcome, make sure you guys subscribe, share, like, comment, all that fun stuff. We're on Facebook and X and the website, which is empoweredlearningusa.com. So please join us on any of those. I promise not to bombard you, and I promise not to sell you things that everybody else is doing. Karen and I are big about making sure that whatever we share with you guys is stuff we've actually done. And if we're working on it, you might find out about it later. So we'll see how all of that goes. So welcome. Already into April. We picked this topic. I happen to have a lot of questions in regards to this, and I know a couple people in this group are things that they've been working on as well. And it's just one of those topics that always seems to have questions constantly, and they evolve. And Karen and I were just talking about where we're kind of in the third 10-year cycle of all of this information now. So there was the Patrick Devine set of information those years, and then there was the next set of years that kind of took it to the next level and started talking about courts and all kinds of different things and challenging all of these things. And now we're kind of in that mode of, okay, it's a little bit more out in public and everybody's starting to get a feel for things. And, states and certain people are frustrated by certain things, whether it's police officers, courts, whatever. We're having to learn how to navigate, even though we know things should be a certain way. Are we actually going to get through them? So we're kind of at the cusp of like the new next section of information, I feel, because we're starting to learn even newer things and more stuff. And, it's kind of like I work for a digital marketing company and I do a lot in AI. It's like the same thing with AI. If you're talking about it today, tomorrow it's changing, right? So there's always pieces moving in here. But one of the reasons we wanted to bring up licensing is it poses some interesting conversations. And I'll have Karen kind of share how our thoughts have morphed over the last few years on, let's just pick driver's license. It's a popular one, right? Like we talk about how it's a contract and should you or shouldn't you have it? And what does that mean? And depending on where you live, how often are you going to come into contact with problematic situations? I've heard that in Tacoma, they really don't like the vehicles that don't have a front license plate. Well, I don't have one because my car came from Arizona. So all of these things that we've been talking about. So Karen, if you can kind of share how just the mere conversation of a driver's license has morphed since even you've started working through this process.
So when I started walking through this stuff, I had a driver's license, didn't have an issue with it, thought it was fine. Everybody drives. And then I started learning vocabulary. And then I started learning traveling versus driving. And then I started going, wait a minute, I'm not conducting commerce, taking it as a personal attack. I'm not conducting commerce. So then I said, forget it. I'm not going to renew my driver's license. I'm out. I got diplomat plates. I knew what I was doing. I was operating the private. And now I've come full circle around after driving through 2 counties in the other side of the state I live in. And they don't recognize diplomat plates. They don't know what they are. They pull you over just because it looks different and they don't know what to do with them. So I went and got a driver's license. And now I'm really coming into twofold going, wait a minute. I operate in the private, but everything I do out there, I like outside my meat suit, right? Like outside my body, right? Like is commerce. Everything I do is commerce. Why would I not have a driver's license? Okay. So now I have a driver's license. And now I have registered my automobile. And when I registered my automobile, I actually signed the license and registration as beneficiary because now I know it's a trust, right? And I'm like, okay, so now what I'm doing is I'm actually writing off those expenses within my own business. And so having them becomes a business expense, not a personal attack expense. And so I'm really learning how to use that license to my benefit to avoid some of the controversy that I unknowingly created by trying to be private in a public arena.
Right, right. Because we've learned, all of these things, put them to use, right? And you can probably say the same thing as me. I mean, I still have the diplomat plates in my car, but I don't drive my car very often. I don't live in a big city. I'm a little more inconspicuous. No one, I've had sheriffs behind me, local police behind me. They're probably like, it's the only one we've ever seen. Unless she's doing something wrong, we're going to leave her alone. Um, I don't know. I don't know what their reasoning is, but I think it just depends. And
It does.
again, what is the piece we're trying to learn? Well, now I drive around and I'm constantly thinking about, well, okay, what would I say and how would I address this? And I would answer it totally different now that when I first did it, right? When I first turned my plates back in and I was, okay, I'm going to print, this form out, or this is what I'm going to say. And then you start to learn like, yeah, don't do that. Like you're just going to poke the bear if you say certain things. So I like the one I shared it with Karen earlier. Is actually really funny. I shared a Facebook reel. The girl got pulled up. This is a reenactment for sure. I do not think it was a live actual traffic stop. It was just meant to be funny.
Yeah,
So
please don't do what she's going to
no, and
describe.
this is
That's
exactly
funny.
why I say this, right? Like I think it's funny because as much as I would love to do this, you don't, right? It's meant to be funny. She gets pulled over. She says, "Officer, I'm guessing you pulled me over for speeding." And he says, "What is your name?" And she says, "Frida." And he goes, "Okay, what is your last name?" And she said, "Go, ma'am." And he goes, "So your name is Frida Go, ma'am?" She goes, "Thank you. Have a nice day." And she pulls off. So it's meant to be in light of, right? Like we're watching these conversations we're having and it's meant to be funny, but I think the last several years have showed us all the people that challenged it really hard. And as much as they were probably in the right as far as constitution, law, all of that stuff, um, they had some big fights on their hands and a lot of fights they didn't win. So that's why we want to make sure that when we teach you about licenses and permits, we're not going to tell you which ones to use and not use. We'll tell you, this is what you need to think about, how it does it apply to you, and you really need to put it in a practical application. So one of the things I did today that I will share with you guys. AI is a great tool, and I started messing with ChatGPT several months back when it came to researching some of this stuff, just out of sheer curiosity, just to see what it would say if I said, this is unconstitutional, what do you think? And in the beginning, ChatGPT came back with a lot of like, well, conspiracy theorists say, and so I kind of giggled and I looked through it, but it's interesting what came back. So today I asked Grok 3, I said, what licenses are unconstitutional? So I am going to share my screen with you guys on what that looked like when it came in. So can you guys see this okay? Okay.
Yeah.
So the prompt I said, what licenses are unconstitutional? Now, I'm not going to go through and read all this. I'll give you guys, like I said, in the YouTube, it'll post, and then anyone on the call, I can send this to you guys. But I kind of highlighted the points that stood out to me. So it says the question of whether specific licenses are unconstitutional depends on how they're evaluated under the Constitution. So constitutional provisions like First, Second, Fifth, and 14th Amendments, as well as Supreme Court proceedings. So you guys have heard through this whole thing, like what court cases back up. So we've always been looking at all of that stuff. And it says it can outline some of the types of licenses that have been challenged. And it says one key principle is that the government cannot impose a license or requirement that unduly restricts a constitutionally protected right without a compelling justification. This is where a lot of the arguments have come in, right? Picking apart all of the stuff. So this particular Supreme Court case talks about a license for public demonstrations was unconstitutional because it infringed on the First Amendment right of free speech. Same with Second Amendment, right? Requiring a license for gun ownership or concealed carry infringes on your constitutional right. But the courts have upheld some of the requirements because they're tying it to public safety. Same thing, 14th Amendment, right? It's occupational licensing. So it just depends on what they talk about with due process and how that works. Right to travel. Courts will consistently uphold it under states' police power because they're going to default to safety every time. That driving is a privilege and not a right and subject to regulation. So all of that can be argued. Talks about how the licensing might be unconstitutional if it overly restricts, lacks a rational basis, involves unchecked discretion, like gun permits and things like that. But I took it a little further because it asked me, what's your take on a particular license? Now, the reason I chose this one is I had a conversation not too long ago with someone that asked me about this. And so I said, marriage license, isn't it a contract with the state? Now, hopefully you see in all of this that when we talk about the marriage license, it isn't the only contract this applies to, right? It's to get you thinking about any contract that kind of looks and sounds like this. So Grok said to me, your right to frame a marriage license as a contract involving the state. It's a fair way to look at it. Legally, a marriage license is a government issued permit. Okay. While back, we were all taught, what does permit mean? You're asking permission. Well, why do I need to ask permission? I don't need permission. God didn't put in the Bible, hey, make sure you clear this through so-and-so. So it talks about the state defined rights, obligations, and privileges. And this applies to a lot of things that we sign up for where we're contracted with the government. So take it down a little further. A state license turns a natural right into a state-controlled privilege. And Karen, when we were talking about this, said, why would I want to do that? So it's just an interesting take, right? So I'll continue through here because I have a point to part of my story after this. Contracting with the state angle gets thornier when you consider disillusion. So what you're basically doing is at the bottom, it says, if marriage is a right, why the permission slip? It's more about whether you buy the state's claim to referee. So what happens in divorce, right? It's messy, it's ugly, it's court garbage, right?
Scroll up a little.
Oh, scroll up.
No, oh, sorry. Go scroll down a little. There
Okay.
we go. We couldn't see the whole thing.
Oh, gotcha. Okay, yeah. So there's the bottom piece. So again, this is like everything we're discovering, right? We're finding out where we've been duped. We're finding out what it really means. We're finding out what the clarity is. But when we go to challenge it, it's not that easy. So that's one of the things that we're moving into. And one of the reasons the marriage license conversation came up is I had somebody say to me, do I really need to get one? And I said, well, what are you trying to accomplish? And she said, well, I have a power of attorney or prenuptial. I said, okay. And she said, I said, do you really need a license then? And she goes, well, what about the people that, are getting married in the church and they see it as just something that you naturally do? And I said, okay. I said, where does God say you need to have permission? He says, here's the requirements. You need to be equally yoked. You need to do it in front of God and witnesses. It's pretty simple. He keeps it really simple and straightforward, just like baptism, right? You don't have to go through certificate and all this other stuff. If you want to do the act, you do the act under God's laws and rules that you deem as your instructions, right? It doesn't have to be contracted through a third party. So I've learned a lot about in the last several years, especially getting involved in third party contract is what messed up all of this stuff. So I think if anything, it's caused us to go, who am I contracting with? Do I want to? Do I need to? And if I have to, how do I make it to my benefit and not theirs all the time? Because there's always options, right? So, Karen, I'll let you jump in and give me any feedback on those topics.
No, I think it's great. I think it is paramount to understand who's my third party. And typically the third party is somebody silent who we've never even considered before, right? Like if I'm going to hire the housekeeper to clean the house, then who's my silent third party? Do you know? Because I know who my silent third party is. It could be a third party, it can also be a fourth party. So let's look at that. If my housekeeper and I have a contract, who am I equally yoked to? Well, that's my husband. So now I've got a third party contract between me, the housekeeper, and my husband unknowingly because we're equally yoked. If I'm not here, he's got to pay her, right? The other thing I can be equally yoked in and a fourth party contract is my husband and I were equally yoked. I've contracted with the housekeeper, but what if she brings an employee? Don't I have now a contract, a four-way contract? So sometimes those parties are actually silent and we've contracted with them and we don't even know it, right?
Yep.
So it's really important that we look at that. Sometimes like if I have a contract with an insurance company and I'm married, is my husband a second driver? Well, if he's a second driver, he's an automatic third party to the contract. Who are we contracted with? Him, I, and the insurance company. And so it's really important to know that if I'm married, automatic, it's a third party, sometimes more. Automatic.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's where it gets crazy because and Troy, that's a great question. So Troy said, are not you and your husband seen as one? You are in the eyes of God, but you're not in the rules of the state. So when you have the license that puts the rules under the state, that's where it starts to get wonky, right? Because you've asked the state, be part of my marriage contract and help me make decisions when things go it right in bankruptcy, in whatever, in we're in a community state, right? So if you're in Washington, you're in a community state. I was the same in Arizona. And if I didn't contract with the state in marriage, would that be an issue for me?
Right. And that's arbitration, right? Because that's what I'm asking the state to do. Now let's talk about if my spouse passes away. So does the state then see God as the silent party? No, the state can't see God at all. In my opinion, they can't see God at all.
Well, they're not contracted with God.
No, not at all. So then the other thing that if my spouse were to pass away, then I still have a third party contract, right? He passes away, he's a non-functioning party. So then now I have a contract with the state and me, and now the state is saying, well, okay, you broke our third party contract because so and so is no longer here. So therefore, the state now is coming forth to collect their half of the estate of the third party entities.
Right. It defaults to you. Yep.
Which equals to probate, right? Because that's where the state wants their portion of the three-way contract because one party's gone. So it really broadens how we look at stuff and changes how we function, right? So yeah.
It's crazy. And the marriage one is an interesting one, right? Because that's a moral dilemma. It's an ethical dilemma. It's a personal dilemma. It's a, how does it impact me from so many different things? I mean, think about it. You are going for both your baptism and your marriage certificates. Those are going through state entities, 501(c)(3)s, right? So they are already contracted with the government, then they contract with us, and then like you were saying, we're contracted within that with each other, and then our kids are technically kind of contracted in that too, because if, like you said, one leaves, whatever. And then not only do you go to probate, but now you've got death tax and this tax and that. So you've told the state, do with me what you will, because I volunteered for your rules. So that's the tough pill to swallow when we start talking about these state licensing. And if you quote unquote have to, what does that look like? And then ask yourself, do I really have to? I mean, you can cancel that contract if you have done enough research and you deem that that makes sense for you. But that's untraining the brain and what we've known our whole lives to be the norm. And you go, would I really want to do that? Maybe you do, maybe you don't. I don't know. That's a personal choice. So, but knowing what's out there and knowing what's actually going on, then you can't get upset when something happens later in life and you go, I didn't know that, right? So that's the kicker on making sure, because once you start layering the contracts, and that's really what's happened to us, right? From the birth certificate to the social, all the way on up, we have just layered these contracts, because if you've ever dealt with somebody passing away, I've dealt with a spouse passing away, I've dealt with parents passing away, I've dealt with grandparents passing away, and they all had trusts and insurance policies and all of that. So within an estate, if it is not a private estate, and that's why at Empowered Learning we teach the private estate, because you are subject to so many other pieces of those contracts that you never even knew about. For example, when my husband passed, hey, everybody comes knocking on the door going, he owed me this, and here's all the debt he has. And I'm like, why am I responsible for that? Well, because I was in a contract. And because he's not there, it defaults to me. So it's very interesting. Anything you want to add on there, Karen?
I was thinking about how putting the contracts into the business is protecting me from being that surety, right? So if the automobile is registered to the business, then the business is paying the registration, the business is paying the insurance, the business is paying all of that. Who does the business have an additional contract with? The business dead entity has a contract with the state dead entity. I'm not a party to it, right? So that's what protects me from my own stuff, right? And if I can use that business or as the protection for that, then I'm like, absolutely, let's do it. Let's write off as much as I can and move as much as I can into that business to protect me. Now, what could be the flip side of that, right? So the business pays taxes, okay. The business has write-offs, okay. The business could do estimated tax payments to offset some of that, okay. The trust could actually own the business, and then the trust becomes the party that's got the beneficial interest ownership of that business. However, the trust and the corporation and the state are not linked. They're not linked. It's either the state and the corporation, or it's the corporation and the trust, but there's no third party, leaving me completely sovereign and outside of that. And then I keep hearing this kind of coin phrase going around, and that is, I want to live a corporate life. And until I actually started looking at all of the different contracts that I'm in, that I'm a third party to, that's when I went, you know what? I want that corporate life, because I don't want to be the contracted party to that.
Right. You have to figure out how to control the corporate dead entity for the benefit of you, the living, the beneficiary, right? And that's, the Rockefellers, all of those people that we sit back and go, well, how did they do all this stuff? They didn't figure it out before us. They set the tone for it, right? They were the geniuses that set up the manipulation that we now have to unpeel and go through all this stuff to figure out what is the proper way to do that, because they didn't want everybody knowing. Obviously they had a monopoly on the thought process of this is how we do things. But the more you peel it back and the more you look at what are those in the upper echelon doing, they don't have anything in their names. Everything is corporations. And like you said, so even though you have, like you and I both have LLCs, right? So that is a license with the state to say we can operate as an entity. But how we function that entity under our trusts or whatever we're doing, whoever the parent company is, that's up to us on how we structure it. So
Correct.
you have to educate yourself on, well, what is that proper structure to protect it? Because if I leave that LLC hanging out there with only the state license, then I am subject to only their rules until I change the rules. We have options. That's something we've never really been taught, is what are our options? They don't want us to know we have options. So that's why the entire world is filled with financial advisors and people who do trusts and lawyers and all this, because they don't want us doing this ourselves. They want all those professional people that have been taught a certain way. They don't even know that they're being manipulated, most of them. And they're teaching us, like CPAs, right? I'm sure I know a lot of CPAs personally. They think they're doing a wonderful job. And now that I do research on things and I look at things and go, I'm just doing this because I was told to do this. I'm basically volunteering my information to the IRS in the way they want it, not the way I want it. So I've got to do my research and do my business taxes different and my personal taxes different, because I'm now looking at it as, if I was the IRS or another corporation and knowing what I know, how would I want this to go? And when you read through all the rules and regulations, it tells you right in there, this is what you can do. So it's not like we make up the rules and we say, oh, we want it to look this way, we do it. We follow their instruction that says we can do these things. We've just never been told that's the way to do it. We've been told, give it to someone else, they'll make it work for you. Well, just like attorneys are not employees for us, just like IRS agents and tax agents are not employees for us, they have useful information that teaches us and helps us learn, but we have to be our own tax agent, attorney, all of that stuff, because until we do, we don't know what we're missing out on.
Well, when I go to my CPA or my I don't know, John L. Scott or whoever it is, now I've got a third party contract. Well, it's actually more parties, because if I'm married and I'm going to my CPA, they're doing a married return. And now I've got a contract with me and my husband and with the CPA and the IRS. So now I've got a 4-way contract. And the CPA actually absolves themselves, right? Because they're just the preparer, right? And now I'm automatically the debtor, and the IRS is the collector just by the relationship, right? So no wonder that's not to my benefit. So now I'm like, okay, wait a minute. I'm yoked to my husband unless I say I'm not, right? And we can be one in the flesh, which is the spirit, which is with God, but I don't have to be with him when I contract with the IRS, right? It can be me and the IRS. And now I am telling the IRS on a single level, this is what I'm not responsible for. This is what I need refunded for. And now I have a one-on-one relationship. Spiritually, yes, I'm yoked once with my husband and once with God, and we're seen as one, and that's fabulous, but not when I'm necessarily contracting with an entity. The other thing that we're not taught to do, and I think younger generations were taught to actually spend the time reading, but as generations have changed, the need to read has become less, and we've become this speed reader with the highlights, and we're going to move on with a whole bunch of assumptions made in the middle. And so we hear these phrases of, yeah, well, they don't pay taxes and they should pay their fair share. Well, what's happening is there's rules actually written to help us write off everything. And when we don't read the rules, then we become frustrated and we say, well, they're not doing their fair share. And the real issue is I'm not doing my fair share because I'm not learning what the rules are, right? I can't be angry at somebody else because I'm negligent in my own knowledge.
Right. Right. Absolutely. So do any of you guys have any questions so far on the couple licenses we pointed out and kind of some of that thought process? Throw them out if you do. Don't know what any experiences that you guys have had. I know that, my husband wrestles with the whole, two of them, right? We were talking earlier, the hunting permits and the concealed to carry permit. It's like, yeah, you want to be able to go out and go, this is my right. If I'm indigenous or if I'm classified as this, they have those rights. What makes me different? We even know people that have marked a box saying, I'm native. What does that mean to you? This is what it means to me. Can you enter? It doesn't define it on this piece of paper. So if it says native, I'm going to define what native is. So it's an interesting dynamic of conversation to say, well, what can I and can't I get away with? So if I talk to, my husband grew up with a lot of people and went fishing in Alaska with a lot of native people that don't have to have permission to fish in certain things. And he's going to say the same thing, like, well, if I have to provide for my family and I need food, why does that not still apply to me? But again, it's one of those things that you come across some sheriff or park ranger that's going to say, well, that's not how this works. You have to decide how you're going to handle that conversation and move forward through that. Are you going to dig your heels into the ground, or are you going to try and have an educated conversation and decide how far you want to push that one? So, it's all in your interpretation and your knowledge in the beginning, and then it has to do with, well, what kind of authority are you going to come across? Because now we're dealing with all kinds of authority, right? Corrupt authority, implied authority, actual authority, color of law authority, constitutional authority. So as we're learning all these things, we have to know that we're going to get hit with any one of those types of authority.
Correct. And the interpretation, right? Because a lot of the court cases that are actually referenced as being law are not actually law. They're just judges' opinions that they're claiming to be law. And so then what we run against is a lot of people that are uneducated and truly uninformed, right? Like there's the difference between I just didn't know and I made a mistake and I'm purposefully violating the law, right? So there's different kinds, right? I just didn't know, sorry, overstepped, you're right. That is your right. Absolutely.
Yeah.
So then the question then becomes what spiritually and what ethically am I going to do to align with my adversary quickly? Right? What am I going to do to come into agreement with my adversary, settle the matter at hand, and then how am I going to move going forward? Right? Is this a misunderstanding where I overstepped the property line with my neighbor and I'm just going to move the fence and we're just going to move on? Or is this going to be, I got a ticket, and this is my scenario, I'm not talking about anybody else. I got a ticket. It's not worth my time. I've gotten 2 tickets in 2 counties in the middle of nowhere in this state, and it's impeding my ability to move between 2 states freely in an area where they're just completely uninformed, I'm better off just paying the tickets, getting the driver's license, registering the plate, writing that off as a tax obligation and getting rid of it through the tax process than I am to fight for these tickets and the right to free travel and all of that. That's an uphill battle I don't want to take. And so, though, as I'm becoming more educated and as I'm becoming more aware, where's the battlefield I'm willing to die on? And so far, I put a stake in the ground over one thing in my journey through this and said, this will not happen. I won't do this. And then it happened and I did. And I went, okay, so now that was not agreeing with my adversary. That was actually promoting an adversarial incident. However, I was found to be right, true, and correct. However, that wasn't a journey that I wish on anybody. So I don't teach people how to do that.
Right.
And then, so it really is, who am I and what am I going to stand in? Right. And so that to me is how I'm looking at these contracts. Do I need to cancel the contract and have it reestablished or established new under a business so that the business takes the hit on that, not me? And then I hear, yeah, well, so-and-so's business filed bankruptcy 7 times. Yeah, and that's what they do. That's what businesses do. They get the business, they get all of these accounts, they get all of these contracts. The business then files bankruptcy, restructures, and then keeps going, and then files another bankruptcy and restructures and keeps going. That's what we're supposed to be doing. But a lot of people see it as this negative thing, and it's like, wait a minute, but really? It's not. And that's why we keep doing it. Those of us that have been blindsided or thought they shouldn't be doing that, they're in poor business, are actually taking advantage of all the tax laws that we've never read. And so we don't know how to navigate it. So one of my favorite reading materials is the Internal Revenue Manual, IRM. All the rules are in there. And because of this administration and everything that they're cutting out, all this waste, all this abuse and fraud, and it's getting a lot smaller and a lot smaller. And the smaller it gets, the easier the rules are to understand.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a big one, right? Is, we've talked about this before, is when you logically follow what they say you can do, that eliminates or lessens, at least. I mean, for us, we've kind of been able to avoid it, but I know a lot of people have some issues with the frivolous filings and things. So when you read their interpretation and you approach it from hey, this is how I'm seeing this, but everything you guys have is really complicated. So if I haven't done something correctly, please advise me on where I either misstepped or help me with this or whatever. And that's kind of the attitude when you charge at it like, I know this is my to give me my correct rights. That's when you start getting in trouble. But if you just kind of sit back and play nice, right? Play nice to the extent of, this is how I understand it, this is where I'm going with this, boy, you get a lot of help from people, like help you never asked for. I mean, I've watched Karen make 15 different phone calls to just call and say, hey, I'm checking on something. And somebody will go, bleh, because she has the confidence to ask the right questions. So their immediate response is, well, she knows what she's talking about, so let me give her some insight to help her out. And I remember sitting next to you a couple times where you're like, I didn't even ask for that, but that was awesome. So, and I've done it a couple times too with, in particular with the IRS, just calling to check on things, just seeing, and then they ask you, some questions, and some of the questions are intimidating, right? You can get a little flustered, a little nervous, but if you keep it really simple with all of this stuff and you use it more as an inquiry to say, hey, I'm learning through this. How can you help me? And they'll say, well, these are the things I can't help you with. Okay, good to know, right? But then they divulge a lot of things that are helpful. And it's not just the IRS. If you're dealing with mortgage, like I sent a letter into my mortgage company, I gave a request. Their response was, you're not allowed to ask that. And I was like, huh? So now I get to go do some research and go, okay, well, who is allowed? And so all those responses you get have some sort of next step that you can take in those contracts. So I've chosen not to go after and challenge my car and my home contracts, but I keep chipping away at what's in there. What can I do? What are they giving me pushback on? Um, I think even I had an experience I was telling Karen earlier with my mortgage where I just literally sent in my power of attorney, just said, here you go, just put it on file. And they said, well, we've received it, but in order for us to have it recognized in our system, we need these 4 additional steps to be completed. Okay. So it's just interesting to see all the different levels and all the things that are required. And some of them don't make sense, right? Like if you're going, well, I'm telling you I have the power over my own stuff, but you're telling me how to do it. Well, you got to pick through that, right? You got to learn, why are they asking it? What are really your rights? There's a lot of there's a lot of cases where people have come back and said, well, you told me this, but I've looked this up and this is actually wrong. Here's what this says. Challenge it, and that's how that goes. So
Yeah,
it's just a really interesting world to jump
it
into.
is very interesting. I have had a lot of success calling people and just asking questions. And then I've had 2 incidences where I kind of got a response where I went, what? Okay. One was I actually called the IRS. I was looking for an update on something, and they asked me 3 questions. I only knew for sure the answer to one of the 2 questions, guessed about the second one, and had no clue about the third one. And the lady actually said, well, at this point, because I can't verify you, I cannot answer any questions in regards to this at all. And I said, well, okay, so can you repeat the questions? And she goes, that I can do. And so she repeated the questions. I took notes. I found the answers, and I'll call them back tomorrow. So not everything, just because you can't be verified, is a no. The other one I did is I created an LLC. I went to the bank to set up a bank account, and it turned out we were not a good fit for each other. But I completed some of the information. I then gave them my power of attorney, and they came back and said, well, we'll accept your power of attorney, but we don't typically see a power of attorney for a business because the business typically has governors, and that's who controls the company. And I said, well, in this particular case, the governors work for the company. However, the power of attorney is the one who has the final say. And they were like, well, we'll keep it on file. We've just never seen this before. So we're actually creating the relationships that we want with these entities. And we have to remember that the employees at the counters are just receiving them. They've got to send them off to the back office. And really, they might not like the submission, but not accepting it really is outside their scope. Now, what they can do is they can say, we can accept it if it had these things in it. Okay, great. And because we are the ones that are creating the power of attorney, then we're the ones that get to insert that information to our benefit, right? They can't tell us how to word it. They can just tell us what needs to be included. We're the ones that get to take care of that. So there's a lot of help out there. We can't just give up when somebody decides, hey, look, I'm not doing this. Well, why not? Like, give me something I can work with you in, right? I really liken it to, I catch more flies with honey, right?
Yep.
And I really try not to fight with somebody who has something I want, right? If you've got something I want and you're saying I have to pay this debt somehow, I have to resolve this issue before I can get what I need, then I better get really creative as to how I'm going to do that, Right.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So you guys that are on the call, do you have any questions on things that you're working on? Anything you would like to see us talk about in the future? Any comments, questions on licensing? Throw some stuff at us if you've got anything new. 'Cause Karen and I could sit here and talk all day long about all kinds of fun stuff, but we definitely want to hear from you guys on what it is that makes it relevant, right? So we kinda stayed in a couple different topics just because there's so much to learn. We are putting our second piece of our trust force together so that people can actually start putting those documents and things in there. But we are hesitant with some of the trust stuff because in order to operate a trust properly, just like if you're going to navigate licensing properly, it comes with a lot of education, and you really need to understand the ins and outs of not only the pieces that go into it, but navigating through the public versus private pieces, right? Like, let's know what it looks like if it goes to probate so we can avoid that and structure things the way we need to. Let's make sure we know what the difference between a will and a trust that's created by an attorney and a trust that I create by myself. What are those differences? So, before we give people even the tools to start putting a trust together, that understanding is big. So that's one thing that we really try to focus on, making sure that that piece is in there for you guys. But anything that you guys would like to see education on, either put it in the chat or email us. Let us know kind of some of the things that are relevant. Maybe some stuck spots. I know there's so much stuff. Karen and I, even in the last year, so much stuff that we looked into and followed for a little bit and kind of jumped out of because it's some of it is old hat now, and some people are just beating up some of these old topics. So we just want to make sure we stay relevant with you guys and what's new. And yeah, we talked about not that long ago the Chevron deference and all of that kind of stuff, and what's staying and what's going. And you hear things about you know everyone's arguing with everyone else about whether income tax is legal. It cracks me up. You could stand and have a debate for a week long on this stuff. But the matter of the fact is we have to put a thinking cap on that says I am in this position. What is the correct way for me to function? Does avoiding it help anyone? No. You just get a big fat bill, a knock on your door, a collection agency, whatever. So it's navigating back through what is it I need to know about these conversations that moves me through and past it. Sometimes you can avoid it, sometimes you can't, sometimes you can change it up, sometimes you can do it better. You just have to really start to look at things differently, especially when it comes to what we've been taught we're supposed to do. So, for example, I'll just lean in the tax conversation just because it's an easy one for everybody to understand. We were always taught fill out this box, do this, get this result, go here. When you start to learn things, you start to read that line and you start to interpret that differently. And what Karen and I have done is we've gone through each of those lines and gone back to the IRS manual and say, explain each word in this line to me. What does other income mean? What does a deduction truly mean? Where does this expense go? Because if you've ever filed your stuff online and you answer all the questions and it's great, and then it spits out this report that has percentages in mine, and you look at it and you go, I have no idea what this means, but here you go. Well, you need to know what it means, and you need to break it down, and you need to start to understand, well, wait a minute, I'm telling people I owe them money. Do I really want to do that? Like, is that really truth? So you need to go back and start looking through all these avenues that say, well, what am I supposed to be doing this with? How am I supposed to be doing this? Because we were never really pulled aside and taught, hey, this is the proper way to do things. There's books out there that are being promoted left and right. I'm sure you guys have seen them, news channels, YouTube, everywhere that says zero taxes. Obviously, that's not illegal, or they wouldn't be teaching it to people, and it would, but there are ways to navigate what you need to know and how you need to function in your space. There is no cookie cutter version of how to be a taxpayer. You have to know your own
Correct.
individual circumstances.
The other thing too, when it comes to income tax, just to touch base on this, is to understand there's only two types of tax. That's it. There's indirect, which I cannot get out of. And then there's apportionment, which is based on how many people and what's owed. And it's done universally all the same. Well, we're not, and therefore it isn't. And the indirect tax is okay, can I get around it? Yes. Am I going to? No. Okay, so that's like, well, wait a minute. What do you mean you can pay it, but you can get around it? Okay, let's talk about, we have a bridge here close to where we are, and every time you go across it, the dollar amount changes depending on the time of the day you go across a bridge, which is a real pain for anybody that doesn't carry cash or wants to get those stupid notices in the mail saying you went across our bridge, you got to pay this good to go fee. Okay, well, do I have to go across the bridge? No. Do I want to drive an hour and a half out of my way to avoid the bridge? No, but it's an option. So therefore, that's tax avoidance. Okay. But when we're talking about, did I gain income? Well, okay, wait a minute. What is income? Well, if the IRS manual only defines it as 2 or 3 things, and none of those 2 or 3 things are what I've actually done, I don't have it. So if I don't have it, why am I completing a tax form that says I made income? Okay. The other thing that I've really likened this to is I cannot decipher that language by myself. So I need a tribe. I need a tribe of like-minded people that are more intelligent than me, that are at different stages in this process, so that when I start asking questions, they can then also start asking questions, which is huge because that's what we need, right? My brain by default says I'm a taxpayer. Well, no, now my brain says, wait a minute, I'm not a taxpayer. I'm a tax avoider. How do I avoid the tax? Which is very different than being nefarious and being a tax evasionist. I'm not that.
Right.
Okay. So how can I write off the tax and make it legitimate? It's the same process that I do when it comes to contracts. Did I pull out the Truth in Lending Act and did I look at how to audit a contract? The Truth in Lending Act actually has the entire checklist to go through when I'm auditing a contract. So if I'm auditing a contract, I have to go to the right language, right?
Yep.
And then if I'm auditing my taxes, or I'm trying to decide, do I need to pay taxes or can I avoid this tax? Then that's where I've got to go to the IRM and look at what those rules are. So each thing has its own pocket. Here's the other thing. When I start looking at my LLC and I'm like, well, I need to purchase this for the company, then I have to start looking at that as, okay, where's my purchase agreement? Where's the subject matter expert for the contract? And then I start going, no wonder all of these companies are so siloed. No one person ever has all the answers. And so then that helps me look at, how do I really want to build my team? Who in my own family or who in my own network wants to go into purchasing? Do they want to work for this business or do they want to start their own? Right. So we still need everybody that's our collaborators, even though 10 years from now, they may be our competition. Right.
Right.
In whatever enterprise they go into. Right. So it's important to have all those options when we start digging into this stuff further.
Absolutely. So I don't have anything else that we had on our agenda. We're just about 5 minutes till. So unless anyone has any questions, comments, I'll give it just a minute as I talk about kind of the next ones coming up. So May 7th will be our next podcast. So that'll be the first Wednesday in May. And I'm really desperately trying to get this information out to you guys earlier. At least I got it out a couple days ahead this time, but my plan is to get it out at least a week or so ahead. Um, but like everybody else, and we've talked about this, I have a full-time job, so um, we will navigate accordingly and make sure that we're keeping you guys up to speed. Again, if you guys think of anything or anything you'd like to hear of, let us know. Otherwise, we will stay on the topics that we have on our website, which is empoweredlearningusa.com. Feel free to hop on. If you don't have an account, please feel free to hop in there and grab an account. That's where we'll send any email updates and any newsworthy things that we would need to share with you guys. Nikki asked, with Chevron, does your opinion change regarding business reporting?
Sorry. No. And in fact, my business reporting is going to get a heck of a lot easier and a heck of a lot simpler, because what's going to happen is the administrative state is going to be downsized. So for example, let's say my business, my LLC wants to send one of the, using this term loosely, subcontractors to an educational platform. That educational platform is not going to be overseen by the Department of Ed at the federal level. So that training may actually be led by local state educational entities or a private entity, which means there's going to be a lot less overhead that I'm going to have to pay in taxes to the federal government for just sending a subcontractor or an employee or myself to a specific training. So the tax obligation on that is going to be significantly less. Now, when it comes to me, the private party, if I have to pay taxes, that means Department of Ed is going away, so I don't have to worry about student loans being governed at a federal tax level where they want to raise my federal taxes to pay for student loans that were taken out by other students. So I won't have to be paying for that. The EPA is going to be downsized, so I won't be having to pay high federal taxes on that. And because of those kind of scenarios, then my corporate entity is going to be paying less in taxes. And the more business contracts my business has, the more I can write off. So it really depends on how I want to leverage what I'm doing to get the maximum benefit. So I don't see the Chevron deference as being a bad thing at all. I think it's going to be huge, being able to allow corporations that I operate, at least, great advantage. However, does that mean somebody like that owns 15 different franchises for footwear is going to be able to get the same tax advantages that I do? Well, they'll probably get more, because if they've got 15 different franchises, they probably know a lot more about what they can write off than I do. So it's not an unfair advantage. I just have a steeper learning curve to learn how to get what they're doing. I don't see it as a disadvantage at all.
Perfect. Any other questions before we close out? Definitely want to be mindful of everybody's time, keeping it to an hour. So again, thank you guys for being on here with us. Feel free to share this information. Make sure that you guys are subscribing if you haven't already. And again, May 7th, the first Wednesday in May, is when we will do our next podcast. So thank you guys for joining us, and we will see you next time.